This is the second part of the review of tonal harmony dedicated to the minor scale. In comparison to major keys, harmony in the minor mode is definitely more complicated. One indication of this is that we typically say that there are 3 different minor scales, whereas obviously there is only one major scale. Why the minor is so different and how to understand when we need to use which version of it can be a little hard to sort out. So let's go through it step by step. The natural minor scale is what we call a scale that starts and ends on the 6th scale degree of the major scale. So here's a C major scale. If we take those same notes but started down on the 6th, we get this. And if we put a little drone under it, so same group of notes, much different sound. For this reason, we think of the major scale and its related minor as almost a single entity, a bright and dark version of the same basic set of notes. But there are several problems with treating the natural minor as just being a darker or sadder version of the major scale. And many of the complications of minor harmony comes from the tweaking necessary to get it to operate in a similar fashion as the major scale does. Looking at the natural minor, we can see that, like the major scale, it has 5 whole steps and 2 half steps, which is no surprise since they're the same notes. But those half steps and whole steps fall in different places. The whole steps are now between scale degrees 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, 6 and 7, and 7 and 8. The half steps are now between scale degrees 2 and 3, and 5 and 6. This pattern gives us 3 intervals that are in common with the major scale. The major second, the perfect fourth, and perfect fifth, and 3 that are different. The minor third, minor sixth, and minor seventh. It's often said that minor intervals are darker or sadder than major ones, but this is probably more of a cultural association than anything universal. If we look at the chords that result from building triads on the natural minor scale, we see that we have minor chords on the 1, 4, and 5. It's the 1, 4, and 5. We have major chords on the 3, and 6, and 7. And a diminished chord on the 2. This should seem familiar, since it's the same batch of chords we would have in the major scale. It's just with different scale degrees as the roots, since we've shifted everything down so that the tonic is on 6. It seems like a nice fit. The chords that were major in the major key are now minor, the 1, 4, and 5. And in terms of the functions, the tonic functions are the same, the 1, the 6, and the 3. The subdominant functions are the same, the 2 and the 4. But it's when we come to the dominant function chords that things start to break down. Let's go back and remind ourselves what gives chords their functionality. If you remember, the tendency tones in the major scale move to the notes of the tonic triad. 2 moves to 1, and 6 to 5, and 4 moves strongly to 3, and 7 very strongly to 8. This was a big reason that the functional tension and resolution phenomenon works so well. Well, how does it work in the minor scale? The 2 will move still to the tonic, but it'll move even more strongly up to the 3rd since it's a half step away. Now, does the 4th move as strongly to the 3rd? Not really, since there's now a whole step between the 3rd and the 4th. The 6 does still move to the 5, and in fact, since it's now a half step as well, it moves so even more strongly in minor. But what about that all-important leading tone? Well, we don't have one, since the 7 is now a whole step from the tonic, so its tendency to resolve is much weaker. Tendency tone resolutions then in the minor scale do not really resolve as effectively to the tonic chord as they do in the major. If we try out the basic 1-4-5 cadence formula that's so effective in the major, what happens? It's a nice progression, but compared to the major, it doesn't really have the same force of tension and release. And the main problem is the lack of a leading tone. The answer that composers came up with is straightforward. Change the notes. If you raise the minor seventh to a major seventh, you get a leading tone. Now our minor 1-4-5 progression goes like this. Much more effective. But of course, when we change the scale tones, we've changed the chords we make from them. So here we still have the minor 1 and 4, but the 5 has been converted into a major triad, since the leading tone of the scale is the major third above the 5. So we have the familiar 5 dominant chord, just as it is in the major scale, operating in the minor. In fact, we can even turn it into a dominant 7th chord, which resolves to the minor. This new version of the scale that we had to make to have a more satisfying harmonic resolution is what we call the harmonic minor scale. So, why don't we just use the harmonic minor all the time? Well, the issue is that interval that we've created between the 6th and the newly raised 7th scale degree. They're now 3 half steps apart, which, since they're still consecutive letter names, we're going to have to call an augmented second. The sound of this greater than whole step interval seems to have rubbed people the wrong way. Maybe it's too pungent of a sonority, or it was awkward to sing, or hard to write smooth melodies for. Maybe a combination of all of them. It's hard to say. In any event, when the raised 7th is used, and it's part of a melody, it became common to also raise the 6th scale degree to make the interval a more manageable whole step, giving us our melodic minor. When the melody moved back down away from the tonic, and therefore didn't use the raised 7th scale degree, it became the tendency to just revert back to the natural minor. Let's see an example of all this. This is a part of a Bach chorale. The passage is in A minor. And we can see the raised leading tone G sharp every time there's a dominant function chord. There's E major chords, and then a 7 chord, which is the G sharp diminished, in measure 2, also a dominant function chord. We can see when the alto voice is moving up to the G sharp in measure 2, he precedes it by the F sharp to avoid an augmented second. In the next measure, when the alto is moving down and the music is not cadencing, there's a G natural and an F natural, but then a G sharp right away again in the next beat because it's a dominant chord, and so the leading tone is necessary to cadence to the A minor in measure 4. If all this seems confusing, don't worry. The basic rule of thumb is that every time there's a dominant function chord, there needs to be a leading tone. If there is a melodic line that has that leading tone, then you should raise the 6th as well. Otherwise, just use the natural minor. In reality, then, there is just really one minor scale, the natural minor, with 2 notes that you need to raise if you're cadencing and want a stronger dominant chord, and have a smoother melody line.